Hello, friends. Today, I'm sharing a story that's as unexpected as it is deeply compelling. It's a tale about love, connection, and the kind of emotions that arise when life throws you a curveball. Imagine this: a young man and his girlfriend's father, two people from entirely different walks of life, finding themselves drawn into an unexpected bond that challenges everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. Curious? Stay tuned, because this one is full of heart, surprises, and a raw honesty that'll keep you hooked until the very end. Let's title the story, My Girlfriend's Father is a Charm. The garage was more than just a place for tools and forgotten trinkets. It was a sanctuary, the kind of space where the air seemed heavier, not with the weight of dust, but with unspoken words and lingering emotions. That evening, under the faint, flickering light of a single bulb, I found myself confronted by a truth I could never have anticipated. Jerry, my girlfriend Clara's father, was the embodiment of warmth and confidence. With his booming laugh and endless tales from his youth, he commanded any room he entered. He had a natural charisma that could put anyone at ease, but it was easy to assume that he was a man without cracks or doubts. That was before that night in the garage. I had come over to help with a minor car repair, a leaky oil filter that needed replacing. Clara was out with friends, leaving Jerry and me alone for a few hours. The task itself was straightforward, but Jerry seemed in no rush. His hands moved methodically as he passed me a wrench or explained the finer points of engine maintenance. The conversation was light at first: work, Clara's upcoming exams, and a few sports-related jabs. Then, the mood shifted. "I don't know if I've ever told you how much I appreciate you being there for Clara," Jerry said suddenly, his tone softer than usual. I looked up from where I crouched beside the car, surprised by the sentiment. "She's been through a lot, and it's good to see her happy." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "She's incredible. I'm lucky to have her." Jerry smiled faintly, but there was a flicker of something else in his expression: hesitation, maybe, or doubt. He leaned against the workbench, fiddling with a small screwdriver as though gathering his thoughts. "Funny thing about happiness," he murmured. "It's not always as simple as it seems." I set down the wrench, sensing that he was about to say something important. And then, as though a dam had broken, Jerry began to talk. He spoke of his youth, of passions abandoned and dreams deferred. He told me about choices made for practicality rather than desire, about moments when he felt like he was watching his own life from the outside. His voice, usually so strong, grew softer with each word. And then came the confession that left me reeling. "There's a part of me I've kept hidden for a long time," Jerry said, his eyes fixed on the floor. "From Debbie, from Clara, even from myself at times. I don't know if I've ever really let anyone see me for who I am." His words hung in the air, their weight almost tangible. I didn't know what to say. The man I thought I knew, a pillar of strength and certainty, was suddenly revealing vulnerabilities I hadn't imagined. "I've spent so much time trying to be the provider, the protector," Jerry continued. "But sometimes I feel like I've been living someone else's life." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. What was he saying? Was he asking for reassurance, for absolution, or just for someone to listen? I didn't have answers, only an overwhelming urge to bridge the gap between us. "You don't have to hide," I said finally. "Not here." For the next hour, we talked. Really talked. Jerry shared stories of moments when he felt trapped by expectations, of fleeting glimpses of a life he'd never allowed himself to pursue. There was pain in his words, but also a quiet hope, as though saying these things out loud was lifting some of the burden he carried. As he spoke, I found myself sharing more than I intended. I told him about my own fears, about the pressure to always have everything figured out. I told him how I often felt like I was just pretending to be the person people expected me to be. There was a vulnerability in our exchange that felt almost sacred. When he finally fell silent, the garage seemed to exhale with us. I glanced at Jerry, who was now leaning heavily against the workbench. For the first time, I noticed the tiredness in his eyes, the lines around his mouth that spoke of years spent holding things together for everyone else. "I've never told anyone that before," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unsure if words could even begin to match the gravity of what he'd shared. "Thank you for trusting me." The moment didn't end when we left the garage. Back in the house, as we sat down to dinner, the air between us was charged with an unspoken understanding. Clara returned shortly after, her laughter filling the space and momentarily dispelling the heaviness. But every so often, Jerry's eyes would meet mine across the table, and the connection we had forged lingered. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking about Jerry constantly. There was a new awareness between us, a subtle shift in the way we interacted. Simple things, a hand on my shoulder, a shared glance, took on a deeper meaning. And yet, it wasn't just physical. It was the quiet moments of conversation, the way he truly listened when I spoke, that left me yearning for more. One evening, a few weeks later, Clara invited me over for dinner. Debbie was out of town, and it was just the three of us. After the meal, Clara excused herself to take a call, leaving Jerry and me alone in the living room. The silence was comfortable, but there was an undercurrent of tension, an awareness of everything left unsaid. Finally, Jerry spoke. "About that night in the garage," he began, his voice steady but his gaze uncertain. "I don't know what you must think of me." I shook my head. "I think you're one of the most honest people I've ever met, and I'm glad you told me." For a moment, he seemed on the verge of saying something more, but then Clara returned, and the moment passed. It wasn't until a week later that everything came to a head. I had stopped by to drop off something Clara had forgotten at my place, but she wasn't home. Jerry answered the door, looking surprised but pleased to see me. "She ran to the store," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "You're welcome to wait." I hesitated but nodded, stepping inside. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. Jerry led me to the kitchen, offering me a drink, and we settled into an easy rhythm of conversation. But the unspoken tension was still there, just beneath the surface. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. "Jerry," I said, my voice firmer than I expected, "that night in the garage, I've been thinking about it a lot." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "So have I." Before I could lose my nerve, I stepped closer. "I don't know what this is, or what it means, but I feel it. And I think you do too." For a long moment, he didn't respond. And then, with a small, almost imperceptible nod, he closed the distance between us. What began as an unexpected moment of vulnerability had become something neither of us could ignore. It was messy and complicated, filled with questions we didn't yet have answers to. But it was real, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were both truly living.